Welcome to Soul Lab, a Christian-based podcast utilizing logic, history, science, and scripture to better understand the Christian faith. And now your hosts, Delaney and AJ.
Welcome back to another episode of Soul Lab. We're your hosts, AJ and Delaney. I'm Delaney, that's AJ. And we are going to be discussing drinking and Christianity, if Christians can drink and if they cannot, and kind of the morals and ethics and reasonings behind it.
Yeah, we're going to be talking a lot about why drinking alcohol is a sin. And maybe why it's not.
It's not. So I'm going, what it's not.
Yeah, but it's definitely going to be a heated topic because there's a lot of Christians that feel super strongly one way or the other on this subject.
And to throw into there why it can be a sin and why it cannot be, depending on kind of your walk, your personal convictions.
Yeah, or maybe it's always a sin.
Or experience. Just listen in and we'll find out.
Yeah, we're definitely going to be talking some of the pros and cons, where Christians fall into on this subject. So stay tuned because we're going to be talking about a serious challenge that we have for you guys at the end of this. So on the topic of drinking alcohol and whether it may or may not be a sin, right? Christians fall into certain buckets on this topic.
Certain buckets, like categories? Okay, tell me about these categories.
And I'm sure you've experienced this before, but you have the people who are hardcore. Drinking is perfectly fine. There's no issue with it. There's nothing to worry about. They're Christians and they say Jesus turned water into wine. Nothing to worry about there. It's a gift from God. So that viewpoint is called moderationism, which is basically the idea that alcohol is a gift from God and that as long as we drink it in moderation, perfectly fine. No issue with it at all.
Okay. Are there Christians who believe that moderation is not necessary and it's okay to drink to drunkenness?
That I don't think so.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of. I've never heard someone make that argument.
Okay.
But I have heard people say many times that, hey, it's fine to drink as long as it's in moderation.
Okay.
I had not heard that alcohol was a gift from God, though, until recently.
Okay.
That's a new sort of argument that I've heard people say to try and defend it. Yeah, so moderationism. And the second category is those that fall in the bucket abstentionism, which is obviously the word abstain is a part of that. And so the idea is that this viewpoint is drinking alcohol isn't necessarily sinful. However, it's more harmful than good. And because of that, you should completely abstain from it. That is not worth the risk of the sin. Okay. Now, the third bucket is prohibitionism.
It's like that's like illegal, wrong.
Sinful.
Because the prohibition, it was illegal.
Yeah. So that's not as common now. More so you find that in individuals. There's not, if you were to ask a whole church group, hey, what do you all believe? They don't believe that way. But I find more individuals that believe that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I used to go to a church group that did think it was wrong. It was a prohibitionist.
There's two different people that don't drink alcohol, right? Like you have the ones that say, hey, we don't think it's sinful.
Right.
We just don't condone it.
Yeah.
We think that it's more evil than good, or we think that it's more likely to lead to sin.
Oh.
And so therefore we just abstain from it.
It's like a stumbling block, but it's not the stumble.
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
It's not a sin, but it can lead to sins.
Right.
It's not a sin, but it can cause other problems.
Okay.
But then you have the other side that's no, it is a sin.
It
like
is the
100%,
stumble.
that is a sin. If you do it, boom, sin.
Okay.
Right? And so that's kind of what we're talking about today is those different viewpoints and I don't want to sit here and say, when I was researching this, I thought I was going to be able to find a church that wholeheartedly says that's a sin. Couldn't really find it. You'll find parts of churches that agree that. There's certain Baptists that believe it is a sin. There's certain Seventh-day Adventists that believe it's a sin. But does the whole Baptist community believe that? Absolutely not. I couldn't find a whole denomination that these days says we believe that it's a sin necessarily. However, you will find groups, maybe small groups that say we all collectively, maybe a specific church of Baptists will believe that, a specific church of XYZ denomination.
Yes.
I see it a lot in individuals is where I see it, where I've had conversations with people and they've said, oh, that's a sin. Drinking is a sin. Why would you drink? And I'll ask them, why do you believe that? We'll have conversation. And it's not from their church necessarily. It's just their own personal beliefs is what I find. And so anyways, I say it to say, now churches do collectively believe in the first two that we talked about. So moderation,
Okay.
the idea that you can drink in moderation. There are churches that will take the claim, we believe that to be true. Drinking is fine as long as it's in moderation. There's also churches that will make the claim of abstaining, saying we don't believe it's a sin. However, we don't condone it. We don't encourage it. We don't allow it in our church, right? There's churches that will make those two broad statements. Those you'll find.
I just interesting that there's no church who believes the other.
I couldn't find
That's
it.
interesting.
This.
I've met Christian individuals who do believe that it's a fine to drink, that they like fine to get drunk, that there's no moderation to it. But those are individuals, not church groups.
And that's another more rare category, I think. There are people who believe, they say, I'm a Christian, I get drunk all the time. I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all. There are people who believe that. I don't really call that a bucket because I feel like that's incredibly rare. I think inherently most Christians are self-aware enough to know that drinking too much is a sin and therefore don't have that viewpoint.
Maybe it's a cup.
A cup of what?
Buckets are Christian.
Oh, you have buckets and you have cups? Yeah, that's more like a cup. Just to recap, so moderationism is the idea that alcohol is a gift from God and that it's something to be enjoyed. It's actually something that's good, like many other gifts that God gives us.
Is there backing for that? What's their logic with that?
I think to answer your question on why I think people believe that is, the first miracle.
Water into wine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Jesus turning water into wine.
First recorded miracle in the canon Bible.
Yeah. And there's much speculation on why that. Why was that the first miracle? And that's a whole nother conversation. But I think we can agree based on that, Jesus wouldn't give people something that he believed to be inherently evil, that it was a holistically evil. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. And so I think the viewpoint is that Jesus gave at a wedding many people this wine specifically. Therefore, it is something good. And that's kind of like their viewpoint.
There's an argument that I think prohibitionists have, but I may be misquoting the bucket. But apparently this argument is that wine that he made was not alcoholic. Have you heard that argument before? I've
heard the argument that alcohol back then was of lower alcohol content than it is today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that argument, which we're actually going to talk about here in a little bit.
Okay, perfect. Because I don't know what I think about that. I haven't delved into percentages of alcohol 2 years ago, but
I'll tell you, just to touch on that, what you said is a little different from what I'm talking about, because you're saying there's no alcohol at all in that wine that Jesus created.
I don't think that.
Yeah.
But that argument
that's an
has
argument
come
you've
up.
heard.
Yes.
My only rebuttal to that, and we'll get more into this later, is that in the text specifically, it says someone speaking to Jesus saying, why would you bring out this high quality wine? I'm paraphrasing. Instead of, usually what you do is you drink the high quality first, and then you get the cheap second.
Because you get drunk, and then you don't need to
and
taste it.
And they don't need to taste it.
Right.
So someone challenged Jesus on that, which means that it probably was higher alcohol content, actually.
Okay.
It probably was like high quality wine. So as of right now, which bucket do you fall into?
This very moment or prior to my research?
Oh, prior to your research, actually.
Prior to my research?
Yeah, I'm curious.
So prior to my research, I think it was individual for each person. I think each person is convicted for certain reasons. I was between moderationism and abstinentism, just because my system doesn't react well to alcohol. Just for me personally, but for overall moderation.
Interesting. So my opinion before this was wholeheartedly moderationism. The idea that drinking is perfectly fine as long as it's in moderation.
Yeah.
I have a slightly different perspective.
No, we're going to the liquor cabinet after this.
No.
Okay, thank God.
No, but I will.
If I should be moderate.
Yeah. But I will explain later, like how my viewpoint did change a little bit after kind of researching this and looking into this.
I was affirmed in my viewpoint, but I feel more bold in my opinion.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I feel like this is one of the reasons that I enjoy this podcast so much is you and I do this research, and every time we research a topic, we learn something.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it does completely change my viewpoint on something. All right. So why don't we start out talking about some argument? So really what we're talking about today is the idea like why drinking is or is not sinful. That's the real topic that we're focusing on today. Okay. And I want to start out talking about what are the arguments for why drinking
for it being sinful. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So arguments for being sinful, just off the top of my head.
Yeah,
okay.
Go for it.
The Bible talks about not being a drunkard.
Yes.
And that is said, I think, a couple of times. But
I know. Yeah.
Okay. I know one time for sure it says don't be a drunkard. There's a couple of stories where people are made to be fools in the Bible, and they're sometimes drunk. And so that would be a good example. Something about having clarity of mind and thought is something that's discussed in the Bible, not referencing alcohol, but like people use it as an argument. So you want to be if you want to have clear minds and thoughts.
I would say that's one of the most common arguments that I hear people say. They say the Bible specifically says, do not be a drunkard. And I'm going to tell you how many times because I was curious. The Bible warns 17 times on the specific subject of drunkenness, right? And here's the deal. We see that throughout Old and New Testament, that the drunkenness is a common theme. It's a common warning not to be drunk. Many different reasons for that. Like you said, there's specific scripture that says, do not be drunk. There's scripture that talks about don't be drunk and become angry. Don't be drunk and become unclear-minded. But basically, the Bible does say many times, don't become a drunkard. Now, here's my rebuttal to that. I guess it's twofold. So the first is that it specifically says drunkard, right? Which I feel like is really obvious. But I believe that's incredibly taking something out of context. There is the idea that, it says don't be a drunkard, therefore don't drink. No, it just says don't be a drunkard. It doesn't say anything about drinking alcohol itself. That's my first comment. And then my second comment is that if we were to use that mindset, so if we were to say, it says don't be a drunkard, therefore I can't drink, because that leads to drunkard, right? Okay, that's the frame of mind. Bible specifically says don't be a glutton. Okay, what leads to being a glutton? Eating. Therefore I shouldn't eat.
Well, I see your argument. I was saying that's not right, but that
That's
would prove
the
your
point.
argument. Yeah, okay.
My point is that if we're saying don't be a drunkard means I can't drink because that's the step to drunkard.
Right.
The Bible talks about don't be a glutton. What leads to gluttony? Eating.
Right.
Therefore I shouldn't eat.
I get it.
Doesn't
Okay.
make sense. Bible says don't be greedy. What leads to greed? Simple desires. Just wanting to, just in general, wanting more. Does that mean going to work and making a paycheck is sinful?
Right.
No. So I think logic, you can use logic there and just say, okay, logically that doesn't really add up. And there's just tons of things that Bible specifically, like scripture, Old New Testament, the 10 Commandments, you can look at and say, okay, yeah, that is a sin. The thing that leads to it, though, that doesn't make that a sin. Okay. So anyways, that's kind of like my rebuttal there, is that anything in excess, yes, can be sinful. And that's kind of the theme that we see. Drinking is not sinful, but drinking in excess becomes drunkenness, which is sinful, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
What else you got? What are some other common reasons you've heard?
So,
Yeah, so
you
what are some others
actually,
you've heard?
I started to say this earlier. There's a concept called Pharisaism, which sounds like,
Pharisees?
yeah. And I was reading this article about somebody was discussing how often the Pharisees would take something small and grab it and make it a whole big deal. And that's what's happened in a lot of Christian churches with things like drinking or dancing. There's some churches that are big against dancing and things like that they've gripped onto and held onto. And it's called the Pharisaism way of thinking, where you take something small out of context and you make this whole like lifestyle based
Sure.
around it instead of looking at the actual message behind it. Just be clear of mind, not necessarily you can't drink ever. Yeah.
So like you're saying the idea is that someone will take something and they fixate on it so much that it becomes like this huge commandment
You're
that they
right,
created,
yeah.
this unbiblical rule,
Pharisaism.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we talked about that in another podcast episode. It was like, our denomination's problematic.
I remember that one.
Yeah, remember?
Yeah.
And we said one of the reasons is because it creates unbiblical rules. So can you think of any other arguments for why drinking alcohol might be sinful?
I said one earlier that alcohol back then, there's an argument. The alcohol back then had different alcohol content than current day. Is that accurate? Do you know?
I don't believe it to be true.
Okay.
And here I'll tell you why. The main reason I believe that makes no sense at all is just using Old Testament and New Testament and seeing the fact that we have examples of people getting drunk.
In the Bible.
Yeah. So I'm just going to pick one from Old and New. So Old Testament, as an example, we have Noah. In Genesis 9:20 through 24, it talks about Noah specifically being drunk, right? So that's Old
Yeah, I was
Testament.
going to say, 4 chapters of being drunk is a little excessive.
It's a lot of drunkenness.
Yeah.
And then we have New Testament, Luke 7:34, which I think is where Jesus is specifically accused of being drunk. Let me see if that's the same verse.
Jesus is?
Yeah. Luke 7:34, Jesus is commenting back to a group of people saying that he has been accused of being a drunkard with the words that he's saying. I mean, he said some things that were outlandish to them and crazy, and so I can see why someone might make that claim. The point that I'm trying to get across is that we have Old and New Testament evidence and that was just one from each, one from Old, one from New. There's many others, obviously, but we have plenty of examples of people getting drunk in the Old and New Testament. If the alcohol content was so low back then, I don't see why drunkenness would be so common. That's my first. Did that make sense?
That's your first argument, yeah.
That's my first like logical reasoning on why that argument's kind of dumb.
Okay.
And then the second one was that it doesn't change the fact it had alcohol in it. That's kind of silly to me to say. The reason they drank back then and the reason it's sinful and the reason they drank back then was because it had lower alcohol. I'm like, that didn't change the fact it still had alcohol.
I wonder if it's like history backing having lower alcohol or why that argument even exists.
Oh, I think that argument comes from the fact that there were some civilizations that did create alcohol and that did have a lower alcohol content than we drink today. That is true. You can't really prove that their alcohol content was lower though. I think it's just it's more of a theory than anything based on the fact that in today's society, we have all these different groups of people and yes, their alcohol content in another country might be lower than what we have today here. Even though we all have alcohol, it's not exactly the same. And so it's just a hypothetical theory. Their alcohol was lower, but it's not actually proven. And I could be wrong, and there could be more to that belief system. But regardless, that belief system makes no sense in practicality. Logically, it's they still drink alcohol. Jesus still turned water into wine, still had alcohol in it. Next, you got any other ideas? Any other reasons people might say it's a sin?
We talked about clarity of mind. We'll say something about that. The Bible talks about clarity of mind.
Mm-hmm.
People use that as an argument, that if you drink that you don't have a clear mind. So if you give the opportunity to a witness, then you can't.
Oh, okay. I think that's a really good point. I think that falls into the conversation earlier about how drunkenness is a sin, but drinking is not drunkenness. And therefore, just because you can drink and that leads to drunkenness doesn't make drinking a sin. In that same way, if you have one or two drinks, you're not drunk, you're not cloudy minded. Does that make sense? Therefore, AJ's opinion is that, once again, doesn't make any logical sense.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think the argument, just to clarify, is if you drink alcohol, it's going to cloud your mind and then you can't witness properly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I'm saying,
you can't make decisions properly that could lead to someone else experiencing Christ. That's an argument I've heard a lot of people make. I've heard a lot of prohibitionists say that if they drink, that you don't have a clear mind, therefore they can't properly witness. That's an argument I've heard before.
Honestly, that one makes a ton of sense to me.
Yeah.
I think the misunderstanding there, those people probably don't drink alcohol because you don't have one drink of alcohol and all of a sudden you can't think clearly.
So I was actually going to ask you, AJ,
that's not how it works.
Have you ever struggled to witness when you've been drinking?
Absolutely. If I drink too much.
Oh, if you drink too much. No, I'm sorry. If you have one drink.
No, that's not how alcohol works. Anyone that believes that they've never had alcohol before. Yeah. Or they had it one time harsh and then they thought that's just normal.
No, there are people who can have one drink and get to the point where they can't function.
Maybe. There's one-offs, but you have to recognize that. And I think that that doesn't change the idea though that drinking in moderation maybe is acceptable, because like maybe moderation could be, we know statistically what works for the majority of people, but if you're somebody who is allergic to alcohol or somebody that's extra sensitive, then obviously your moderation is different from someone else's. But yeah, no, that's not how alcohol works. You don't have one drink and all of a sudden you can't function. You black out and can't function. Yeah.
Is in church as a kid, did you ever do like a skit where you had to be drunk?
No.
Okay. So I heard someone talking about this. We had to, like, if we would reenact like a story from the Bible, sometimes it'd be like a drunk person. Mm-hmm. And I remember specifically do you know the story about the prodigal son? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we were like doing a reenactment of that at Vacation Bible School, and we're all like in 8th and 9th grade, and one of us had to be like his drunk friend, like his partier friends. Oh yeah. And I remember, two of us had to be, and I was one of them. We had to act drunk, and I remember me and the girl I did it with had no idea how a drunk.
Yeah, how's a drunk person act?
Yes, I remember us like trying to, we're like stumbling all over the place, which sometimes it's realistic, but it's really not. Yeah. And it's just funny, like now as an adult, looking back on that and thinking about what my 13-year-old self envisioned that to be. Yeah. Before my 13-year-old Christian self, I should clarify, Christian, raised in prohibition beliefs. Yeah.
But so yeah, just like a kid, I feel like that argument a lot of times comes from people who are innocent, maybe is a good word. Maybe their parents don't drink and they were raised not to drink. And because of that, they just don't understand how it works, but that's not how alcohol works. Yeah.
It's just funny that we thought like bad friends were friends who drank. Like that's the bad friends.
Any other ideas on what people might have?
So I'm sure there's be tons in the comments. Yeah. And I have a lot of friends who do believe that drinking is wrong.
Mm-hmm. I have friends that say it's sinful. I have friends that say like that I have friends that fall in all three of those buckets from earlier, but I have a very few, but I do have a few that say it is inherently sinful.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, I have friends who think it's wrong and think it's sinful. Mm-hmm. And we often have like events where we have friends who don't think it's wrong, but they have a drinking problem, or friends who do think it's wrong and so they don't drink. We have friends who drink and it's fine. So we usually have like mocktails and stuff like that. It's like an option.
Yeah, we usually have mocktails. We have parties and stuff.
Yeah. Or seltzer water.
Yeah.
That's what
just delicious. All right, I'm going to tell you another one. You ready?
Yeah.
This one I thought was interesting because to me, this would be a strong argument for it being a sin if this were accurate. But the idea is that alcohol, no matter how much you drink, is damaging to the body, which is a temple. Therefore, it's a sin.
Okay.
Which is actually a great argument.
Super good argument.
If it was accurate. On this topic, I actually have 2 different studies that I'm going to attach in the show notes. One of them was a meta study.
Okay.
A meta study is when someone studies studies. So basically, there was a meta study done on the harmful effects of alcohol. And the meta study involved over 100. Yeah, it was over 100 studies and involved millions of people.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
And so it's a very in-depth study. What the meta study found, which I thought was really interesting, was that there is actually no harmful effects of alcohol within certain moderational limits. Okay. And basically the math came down to this. As long as you only have, as a male, 2.5 to 3 drinks a day. And as a woman,
A day?
Yeah.
2.5 to 3 a day.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what the study found. I'm going to put it in the show notes so y'all can check this out.
Yeah.
I thought this was cool. But basically, it came down to about 2 to 3 drinks for a male a day. 2 to 3 drinks for a male per day.
Well, a female.
And 1 to 2 for a female.
A day. Okay.
Yeah. But think about it. Have you ever had 1 or 2 drinks in a day and you feel fine?
Yeah, but not every day.
Yeah. But the point is that
and
it's
no,
just...
I don't feel fine. I feel so ill.
Think about it. If you had 1 drink,
yeah,
you don't feel ill after 1 drink.
Not usually.
And you're a very
right.
low body fat, petite woman,
yes.
right? So
I
maybe
call myself petite.
so for you, the number would probably be 1 drink a day. But you don't feel anything after 1 drink. So
that's true.
So,
actually, maybe I don't know if it's my age because
Yeah.
I feel like when I was 21, I would have.
So basically, what that study found was that as long as you stay within those bounds, there is no harmful effects out at all of alcohol as long as you stay within those.
What about your liver?
Yeah, no, including your liver. I'm saying your whole body. There is no evidence at all of any harmful effects in any study.
The liver is
under
the
those
big
limits.
prohibitionist. Is that right? Prohibitionist?
For the third bucket,
Yeah.
yeah.
The liver is a big prohibitionist belief that I grew up being taught. Is that, your liver's going to fail. Your liver's going to fail if you even look at a drink. Your liver's going to fail. And
you
then,
so much as think about drinking.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
in university, I was taught, your brain's going to age quickly. Your skin's going to age quickly.
Yeah.
But you're telling me that there's like harmful effects. Okay.
I'm telling you.
Listen, you know what? I'm going to have to read that study.
Go check it
because
out. But what I'm
I'm a
telling you is that,
doubter.
like, one of the studies, so it's a meta study, but one of the studies in it would be on liver.
Right,
One was
yeah,
on
yeah.
brain. It was all these in-depth studies looking at alcohol consumption, and some of them were specifically looking at what does it take to cause that damage.
What does it take?
And so what I'm saying is, my answer to that is what the meta study found, which is for males, less than 2 to 3 drinks per day. For women, less than 1 to 2 drinks per day.
Is okay.
And to clarify, that's per day. That's not per group of weeks. So for example, if you drink 10 drinks one day, that might average out to
But
2
it's
to...
not, it doesn't
But
count.
that's not what the study was saying.
No,
The study was
yeah.
saying, and the whole reasoning there is that our bodies do self-heal. Alcohol is a toxin to some degree, but our bodies can absolutely handle that as long as it's within those bounds that I described earlier.
It's like overloading your dishwasher might like mess up the filter. Or like overloading your
Sure.
washing machine might cause it to
Yeah, but if you
have
put a couple
issues.
clothes in there every day,
Yeah, you're
it's gonna
fine.
be fine. But it's in our whole body is like that. When we see that in fitness, we see that in like physical training, where if I go to the gym and I do a good 30-minute, hour-long workout, I tear some muscles and give them time to heal, I'm going to be okay. If I go to the gym and completely destroy my body every
You're
single
gonna
day,
hurt.
I'm going to get in some serious pain.
Yeah.
So our bodies are designed to self-manage and self-heal to an extent. We just have to know our limits.
I still need to read it. That's insane. I'm gonna, because I know you usually do the thing when you
Yeah,
research.
go check it out.
So I'm gonna trust you, but
Yeah.
I still need to fact check that. That's
tell you this.
insane.
I thought that was really interesting too.
Yeah.
That's probably the coolest thing that
It's
I
like
found
when you get some more
when I was
liquor.
studying this. I know.
On a day, I'm
You
good.
start drinking more.
We're not going to, right?
No.
Okay.
So that's the first study I found on the topic. I thought it was really cool.
Okay.
Here's the second study I found. This one was done specifically on the opposite idea. Are there positive benefits to drinking
Are there?
alcohol? There are.
I've heard that if you have a heart disease, it's healthy to drink red wine, but I've heard that
Mm-hmm.
if you drank enough to help your heart disease,
Mhm.
you'd actually die.
So I think that's a common myth.
Yeah, I heard in
Both ways.
2008, so it's probably like a really old
So
study.
it's not necessarily red wine.
Okay.
There have been studies on drinking red wine in moderation and how it does lower the chances of heart disease, but just alcohol in general has those positive benefits. So I'm going to attach this study as well. But this study found that drinking alcohol in moderation, so we're talking about referring to the first study, staying below those limits, right?
Okay.
Drinking alcohol in moderation actually has a lot of positive benefits, such as lowering the chances of heart disease, improving cardiovascular health. I'm going to attach that in the show notes. People can check it out and look at all the positive benefits.
Is that
but
because it raises your heart rate?
I actually can't answer that question.
I wonder what it does to make it healthy.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good
Does
question.
it raise your heart rate? I think
Alcohol?
it does, because your face flushes. Doesn't your heart? I think it does.
Asking the wrong person. I have no idea. Yeah, I don't know. But I will put that in the show notes, and I mean, there's probably more information on it. So those two studies were in reference to the first argument that was made, which is alcohol is damaging to the body, which is a temple. So obviously the first study contradicts that, and the second study actually makes the opposite argument. However, we'll talk about this more later. Drinking alcohol in excess is absolutely damaging to the body, which is
Okay.
absolutely a temple. 1000% agree with that.
Okay.
All right. So yeah, I think that is a sin. We'll talk more about that later. All right. Here's the last one I've heard. This one I think is also like a silly argument, but this one doesn't really take much research, but it's just the idea that I've heard people make the argument, someone made this to me before, that there's no positive benefit of drinking alcohol, therefore it's sinful.
Well, that's an odd argument.
I've had someone make that
That's
argument.
a very odd
before.
argument. There's no benefit into vacuuming your floor. That's a stupid thing.
No, but I see where you're coming from.
Yeah, there's a lot of things we do with no positive.
So like eating a candy bar, there's not many positive benefits of eating a candy bar.
There's a sugar high, which is good.
Yeah, but is that inherently sinful just because there's not necessarily a positive benefit? No, it's a dumb argument. And I wouldn't even mention unless someone actually has tried to use that against me before.
Right.
But then it also, just to go back to what we just talked about, there are studies that show it actually is beneficial to an extent to drink alcohol. So
fascinating.
There are people I've talked to who think it's sinful, but I think I could be wrong, but I think a lot of our friends believe that it's acceptable in moderation. And there's a small percent that think it's not sinful, but don't do it. And then there's incredibly few that say, no, it is sinful. That's AJ's opinion. But all right. So those are the main arguments I've heard against why drinking alcohol is a sin. And I feel like we've rebutted all of them pretty well.
Yeah, that was a lot.
Okay. So those are the reasons that we've either come up with or we've personally heard on why drinking is a sin. If we missed anything, please let us know. Send us a message, leave some message in the comments.
We actually just kind of random important. We really like discussion in the comments. We're not offended by people, but if you just comment your own opinions and rebuttaling us, we enjoy that. Something we actually like because we're not always right.
I would say we're very humble. We don't assume that we have all the facts. We don't assume we know everything. It's kind of the whole point of the podcast. Is we're open-minded.
We have all the facts.
Yeah. Yeah, we know what we're doing.
We're trying to learn ourselves. So give us some arguments.
Yeah.
Tell us why we're wrong.
For sure. All right. So those are the main arguments. Those are, our rebuttals for why we disagree with them. So here's the next topic I wanted to go over is, because we've hinted at this whole time, but it's the idea that at some point drinking alcohol does become a sin.
When is that?
So that's the conversation. That's the next topic. Before we answer that question, I want to answer first, what even is a sin? What we're discussing is at what point does drinking alcohol become a sin? There's a line there, right? And I feel like it's important first to say, okay, what even is a sin? What does that even mean to use the word sin? And the best way I can describe it is just anything that goes against God's will, anything that goes against God's commandment, anything that puts a wedge between you and God. And for the majority of human beings, I think there's some that apply to all of us. You and I have talked before. There's some that maybe are person specific, depending on certain things. But we can get into that more in another time. But that's kind of what is a sin. So what's your opinion on when does drinking alcohol become a sin?
When does it become a sin? I think if you're dependent on it, that's an issue. I think becoming dependent on it is an issue. I think, like you saying, if it separates between you and God, that's an issue. I think if it clouds like your ability to make judgments, issue. I think if you do things irresponsibly because of it's an issue.
Yeah.
I think if you are like unkind to other people because you don't have control over yourself, it goes back to control. It's an issue.
Yeah, I agree.
Just to name a few.
I agree 1,000% with every single one of those.
If it makes you anxious the next morning, it's an issue because
that's interesting.
That messes with your mental health, which anxiety leads to depression to anxiety. Drinking is the solution. It's the
negative spiral. Yeah.
So that's a sin to yourself. Anxiety. Yeah, we call it hangxiety. It's hangover. Anxiety. Yeah.
Never heard that phrase in my life.
Anxiety?
But I like it.
Yeah.
Anxiety.
Yeah.
Hangover anxiety. All right, let's talk about one of the first ones you mentioned. So you said
anxiety.
Okay, so you said if it makes you anxious, you believe it's sinful at that point. Why is it sinful at that point?
Because that's causing harm to your mental health intentionally. So knowing that's going to do that to you. And some people can have one drink and get anxiety.
Yeah.
Some people don't. Like if I have one drink, I don't usually have anxiety. If I have 4, I might have anxiety.
Gotcha.
So that's harm to myself. I can't focus what I need to focus on the next day.
Yeah.
I'm going to be all uptight, so I can't actually do what I need to accomplish, and I might miss an opportunity because of that, which goes back to it goes back to the prohibitionism way of thinking. But yeah.
So basically it's the idea that drinking in excess can cause mental issues such as anxiety to yourself, in which case because of that it is sinful
against yourself.
I like that. I agree with that. Yeah.
I think there's sins against other people, sins against yourself, and sins against God.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and so that would be a sin against myself. Unless it affects somebody else, then it's a sin against them.
Right. So you mentioned a second ago also, and I think this is a really critical one, is when you're dependent on it, it's sinful. When you're addicted to it, when it's become your master, when it's become an idol, it's clear that we are not supposed to have other idols, other things to worship besides God. That's a very clear understanding. We are not supposed to be a slave to other masters.
Right.
When you're addicted to alcohol, whether you want to admit it or not, you are a slave to it if you're addicted to it.
You're addicted to
It is your idol. It is your master.
With anything that you're addicted to.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. And here's the thing. I just want to say this real quick. Every single thing we're talking about right now is not alcohol specific.
No.
Every single thing we're talking about is the idea that something by itself can be not sinful, while in excess is sinful. And so there's lots of things that fall into that category. We talked about gluttony earlier. So as you guys are listening to this, keep in mind, you might know of a sin that you're battling that is one of these, not necessarily alcohol. But I think all the things we're discussing are ways in which things can be sinful. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's the idea that when you drink alcohol in excess, it is harmful to the body in excess, right? And this is a very strong conviction of mine personally, but I do believe that our body is a temple. I do believe it's a gift from God. I do believe we're supposed to be good stewards of that gift. I think we're supposed to cherish it and treat it with love and respect. We're supposed to take care of it. You only get one body for now until science improves. But it's just the idea that your body, you are supposed to, as a Christian, you are supposed to take care of your body. And that by not doing so, I believe very wholeheartedly that is sinful. Intentionally doing anything to damage your body, I think is sinful. And that could be gluttony, that could be alcohol, but alcohol absolutely in excess. We don't need a study for that. We know that it hurts the body. We know that it's damaging in excess. Drinking in excess harms the body, therefore it is sinful. We talked about being an idol. Man, I meant to read this earlier. Let me read this real quick. What is it? It's 1 John 5:21. We have the Old Testament where one of the 10 commandments is no idols before God. Okay? Here's a New Testament reference to that is, and we know that the Son of God has come and given us understanding so that we may know him who is true, and we are in him who is true. In his Son, Jesus Christ, he is the Son of God and eternal life. Little children, keep yourselves from idols. So we talked about it being harmful to the body, which is our temple, which is mentioned in 1 Corinthians 6:19 through 20. We talked about it being an idol. We talked about it causing you to lose mental clarity. But just on that subject, it causes you, we talked about this earlier too, but the idea that drinking in excess causes you to be, for some people, this isn't true for everyone, causes you to be wrathful, which is a sin. Anger, not a sin. And excess becomes wrath, which is a sin. Lustful, it can make you struggle with lust. We know that alcohol in excess inhibits our thought process. And we know that because of that, we are more susceptible to sins that we wouldn't usually partake in. There's two more things I want to talk about. So here's something I want to make clear, is that we as Christians, I believe very strongly, and I think most people would agree with me on this, maybe not everyone, we are held accountable for the things that we know to be true, more so than the person who doesn't know, but they are still held accountable. And what I mean by that is...
Why do you think that?
So what I'm saying is that we as Christians, the moment that we are aware of something, we are absolutely accountable for it at a higher level. The reason that I strongly believe that is because of a parable in Luke of the two servants, right? And I'm actually going to read it real quick because I'm surprised how many people, I will make this comment and people will be like, I don't know about that. And then I read the parable, they're like, no, that actually makes sense. And first off, I'll just say, I think logically it makes sense. I think that if you know something, you should be more accountable for it. And I think a good judge would agree with that. And we have evidence of that in our own society where if you're in front of a judge and they know you knew not to do something, they can tell wholeheartedly you knew not to do it and you did it, you're held more accountable by that judge into society standard than if the judge knows wholeheartedly you genuinely did not know something was wrong and you did it on accident. They usually will still hold you accountable to a less degree. And we see that consistently in our own society. I say that to say, if we do that, I think God's even a more just judge. And so I think logically it makes sense for that to be true, that you're held more accountable for things that you know are sinful. But that's not my only reason for arguing that. So this is Luke chapter 12, okay? And all the way starting at Luke chapter 12, verse 41, basically it's this really long parable about servants. And it's more of an analogy where Jesus is trying to use, and this is Jesus speaking, it is in red. Jesus is trying to compare, he's using servants as the example towards their master to get a lot of points across. Not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to read the section that specifically has to do with this topic. But it says, and that servant who knew his master's will, but did not get ready or act according to his will, receive a severe beating. But the one who did not know and did what deserved a beating will receive a light beating. And the common understanding here is that Jesus is trying to get the point across. The servant who knew what they were supposed to do and didn't do it was held more accountable than the servant that did not know. They were both held accountable. They were both judged. They were both held accountable for their sin. The one who knew was judged, was beaten more severely, was held more accountable. So logically, I say it makes sense for us to be held more accountable for the things we're aware of, but I think that parable does a great job making it concrete. So what's your thoughts on it?
No, I forgot about the parable. I remember it when I was a kid, though. I didn't like it because I felt bad for the servant.
The servant,
The servant,
the
who
one that didn't know.
Yeah.
See, that's probably one of my favorite parables because it's a terrifying one for sure. First off, I want to say it's a really terrifying parable because it's the idea that the moment you have information, you are now held more accountable. And that's scary, right? It does kind of unsettle me a little bit, the idea that someone who maybe doesn't clearly know something is sinful is still held accountable for it. But I think that's where the Holy Spirit comes in. And I think that the Holy Spirit, although you might not know something is wrong, a lot of times we get the feeling or some sort of inward conviction that we can tell something seems off, and it's our responsibility to act upon that in some way. So anyways, that's my first maybe controversial opinion that I wanted to share. All right, here's the last thing I got for you. Ready? This one's definitely the most controversial. This is definitely the one that I argue with people all the time about. And
this is an argument about why it is sinful.
This is an argument why not just you drinking in excess is sinful.
You allowing others.
That was good. Yes. You allowing others to drink in excess is sinful, not just for them, but for you. I feel incredibly convicted of that. And I'm humble enough to say I could be wrong, but I do believe strongly that we are held accountable for making sure others don't sin. And I think that if we know it's coming and we do nothing, we are absolutely held accountable for that.
Yeah, I've had friends who I don't invite to certain things, so there's alcohol there, and they have an issue.
Absolutely.
And they're some of my close friends, but I don't invite them.
Yeah.
That could be an issue.
It's the reason that you and I have mocktails readily available at parties. It's the reason that you and we've told people before at parties, hey, we actually don't want you drinking because we know it's a problem for you and we'll support you in that. There's times where you and I have both not drank before at a party because we wanted to support someone. But it's we agree, we are held accountable for that and supporting them in their battle or in helping them to not get drunk. So my opinion on that is, first off, logical. I think we can agree, maybe not, I don't know, that loving others is what we're called to do, right? Jesus said, this greatest commandment I give you, this new commandment I give you, love God, love others. And so part of loving others is stopping them from sinning. It is actually not loving at all to encourage someone to sin, is not loving at all to allow someone to sin and help them in that, stop that or avoid that. Now, but I'm going to read you, here's another parable. This is one of my favorite parables as well. This one is Old Testament. We don't usually talk about Old Testament. So this is Ezekiel 33, and we're going to start all the way at verse 1. Now, this is the parable of the watchman. And this is a really cool parable because this is God telling the prophet what to tell the people. This is actually God giving the parable, right? We get a lot of parables from Jesus in the New Testament. This is one of the few times we get it from God in the Old Testament. And I love this. Ezekiel 33:1. The word of the Lord came to me, son of Ezekiel, and said, this is ESV, by the way, Son of man, speak to your people and say to them, if I bring the sword upon a land, and the people of the land take a man from among them and make him their watchman, and if he sees the sword coming upon the land and blows the trumpet and warns the people, then if anyone who hears the sound of the trumpet does not take warning, and the sword comes and takes him away, his blood shall be upon his head. So that's the first part, saying that if the watchman does his job and says, hey, this danger's coming, but the people don't do anything and they just keep doing whatever, it's not on the watchman's head. That's the parable he's trying to get across, is you are not accountable. If you did your job to try and stop a sin or avoid it, and the people wouldn't listen, you're not held accountable for that. If you genuinely did your best. Here's the next part. If he heard the sound of the trumpet and did not take warning, the blood shall be upon himself. So specifically saying it for himself. But if he had taken the warning, he would have saved his life. Now here's the part I'm really wanting to get to. But if the watchman sees the sword coming and does not blow the trumpet, so that the people are not warned, and the sword comes and takes any of them, that person is taken away in his iniquity, and his blood I will require at the watchman's hand. Basically saying that the watchman had the opportunity to warn everyone, did not. Anyone impacted by that is now his responsibility, and now that blood falls on him. So if you as a Christian see something coming that you know is detrimental to somebody, and you don't do anything about it, you absolutely are held accountable for that. I love that parable. It's one of my favorites.
I didn't know that parable.
Parable of the Watchman. Awesome. Ready for some challenges?
Yeah.
Sweet. This is probably going to make some people really uncomfortable. And if you don't like the way I word this, let me know. But this is just how I
so
feel.
Bad at this.
Delaney says that I'm too controversial.
Yes.
But I think this is important.
You say the most triggering things.
Too triggering. I don't mean to be triggering
yes,
intentionally.
You do.
No,
you literally say, I want to trigger people. You literally say
No,
I
say I like the titles to be triggering because it gets people's attention.
Okay.
Which I think it works. But no, I say these things, these challenges, because I genuinely mean them. And I want to try, hopefully,
don't say something
people.
mean and say, oh, I mean it. That's even worse.
No, I'm going to say, I don't think any of this is mean.
Okay,
it's just
ahead.
my conviction.
Okay, go ahead.
Here's my challenge. First off, if you yourself treat alcohol in which any of the ways we described earlier, where it crosses that border from maybe a gift from God to now being sinful, such as maybe it's an idol for you. Maybe you drink in excess regularly to the point where it's harmful to you.
Or it's a medication for you.
It's a medication for you to the point where it clouds your judgment, to the point where it causes you to fall maybe into other sins. If that's a truth for you, I challenge you. Want to say that first off, we love you and your friends love you and your family love you. No one wants to see you battling that. You absolutely need to reach out for help. Make it clear to people you're struggling with it. Find some accountability. Put limits in place there. And you need to combat that. All right. There's a reason that drunkenness is such a common sin in scripture, but also in modern world, right? It's a tough one. It's a strong addiction if you let it get the hold of you. And you need to go get help. All right. Because I'm just going to say that you can't, this is my conviction. You can't just keep getting drunk regularly, knowing that it's a sin, and not accept the fact that you are going to be incredibly held accountable for that.
Okay, here's my opinion. People shouldn't do things because they're afraid.
Yes.
Saying they're held accountable for it is a little bit scary. It's, oh, God's going to get mad at me. That's not the correct response.
Yeah.
He's not going to get mad at you. I mean, I can't speak for God. Maybe he'll be angry.
Mm-hmm.
But the correct, in my opinion, the thing to be afraid of is that it's going to hurt you or someone else someday.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's interfering with God's purpose for you or someone else.
Yeah. My comment is just that I think that what we call ourselves, I say this a lot, but I think what you call yourself matters like this much to God. I think that your actions prove how you truly feel on a subject, right? I can tell you all day that I believe this bridge can hold me, but if I'm not willing to walk across it, that tells you I believe otherwise. In that same way, I can call myself a Christian all day, but if I'm allowing myself to be addicted to alcohol and doing nothing about it, I'm not trying to change my situation at all, and I just keep praying for forgiveness, am I really a Christian? Do I really believe in God? Do I really believe Jesus is my Lord and Savior? Or do I just say it? I'm not going to tell anyone they're not a Christian. That's not what I'm doing.
I was going to say, wow.
I am just simply trying to challenge people on the mindset of, if you think that you can just be drunk every week, drink alcohol as much as you want, pray for forgiveness and live your life that way, I think you're going to have a rude surprise one day. And it's going to catch up to you.
I think I would disagree that it would not challenge your Christianity. I think it would challenge, though, your mission and purpose.
Sure.
Which would not challenge your Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
but it would challenge your, I don't want to say destination, because I don't mean like heaven or hell.
It could.
I don't mean heaven or hell. I just mean like your level of happiness and satisfaction at the end of your life.
Yeah. And we disagree on that. And that's okay. I think it does. I think that I don't think AJ gets to decide if AJ's a Christian, first off. That's another conviction of mine. I think God is the ultimate just judge. And God's going to tell me in the day, did I love God? Did I love others? Did I truly follow him? He's going to tell me that when I'm judged one day. And so I can tell you I identify as a Christian, but God at the end of the day is my judge. Does that make sense?
I think you and I have a different belief.
Yeah.
I think you're going to be judged one day.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't think that I'm currently being judged.
That's the same thing. I agree with that.
Oh,
I think like God's not bound by time and space. God is right next to us right now, watching what we're doing.
Okay, fair enough.
This is so off topic.
Okay, it's not though, because like it's all related. It's all in the same big bucket or cup.
Yeah.
So anyway, I fall into the bucket of moderation. You fall into the bucket of
So going full circle,
yes.
When I started this research, I would say I was a moderationist. Meaning I believe that as long as you drink in moderation, it's fine. But I was a little concerned that I thought alcohol in any amount was harmful to the body. And it really made me question, like, man, but do I believe that? Maybe I shouldn't be drinking.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was something I kind of like worried about. Skipping forward to now, where I've researched it fully, I feel very convicted, highly convicted, that it is not a sin to drink alcohol. It is not inherently harmful to the body. It's just an excess. And I feel like as long as it's in moderation, it's fine. I do believe actually it's a gift from God. I think it is something to be enjoyed.
I wish we delved more into that.
Like why people don't believe it's a gift
No,
from
why
God?
people do believe it's a gift from God.
I'll tell you my opinion of why I think it's a gift from God
Yeah.
is it was Jesus' first miracle, was he gave that to people as a gift, and that in small quantities, so not in excess, it is enjoyable and pleasurable, and it doesn't inherently cause any other sins. I do believe it's a gift from God.
I remember we had a game night and we had a friend who was trying to be sober. Had not shared with us he was trying to be sober.
Yeah.
He came over. He discovered that at the time you and I were sober. I think it was like for 2 weeks. And then our other friend was sober. I think 2 of our friends that were sober. And then 3 of our friends were drinking. And it was just like, not like a lot of people think if you're drinking, then I have to drink. But it wasn't an issue at all. And our friend came up and said, oh, this is awesome. I don't have to feel like I'm out, like the odd one out, not drinking. And we all had a great time.
Yeah.
Some of us drinking, some of us not.
I think
cool.
If someone has the mindset, this goes back to what constitutes it being a sin. But if someone has the mindset, I have to drink alcohol to have fun, it's a sin for you. That's a problem.
Yeah.
No, you absolutely should be able to have fun with your friends or family or with others without alcohol.
Yeah.
And if you feel like you have to have it, that's a problem. All right.
I have an idea.
Yeah. What's the idea?
Let's wrap this up on top too, but don't let me forget. Okay.
All right. So I believe that ends our conversation. So just to wrap things up, we talked about why some people believe alcohol itself is a sin. We talked about some rebuttals on why that none of those arguments really make sense or hold any weight. And then we talked about, but at what point does it become a sin?
Yeah.
So we went over that, had a few challenges for you guys, and I think that's everything.
If you need help.
Oh, the hotline. Yes.
The one I have pulled up is in the National Prevention Toolkit or nationaltoolkit.edu. And it is 1-800-662-HELP. So if you don't have the help part, it's 1-800-662-4357.
Awesome.
Yep.
Love it. Cool.
Yeah.
That concludes our conversation.
Yes,
so,
thank you for coming and listening in.
So as always, if there's any feedback that you guys have, feel free to send us a message.
We've been your hosts, AJ and Delaney, and we'll be here next time.
Awesome. See you guys.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Soul Lab with AJ and Delaney. You can find all materials referenced from today's episodes in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. Check out our website for more episodes and stay tuned for the next release. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.